Okay, I want to introduce Professor Glover here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to join you on this European Gender Summit. And Elizabeth asked me if I would tell you a little bit about the role that I have as Chief Scientific Advisor to President Barroso. So I'm the first Chief Scientific Advisor to President Barroso, and the first question you could ask is, why have a Chief Scientific Advisor? And President Barroso said that he thinks that research and innovation are central to Europe's successful future. And as such, he wants to have a Chief Scientific Advisor so that there's an obvious voice for science in amongst all those other advisory roles that will inform him. So, to be honest, mainly if I look round the room, if he's being advised, I'm looking at economists. But now there is the voice of science in the room, and I want you to believe me that it is a noisy voice, and so it's a voice that's heard. So what do I do? Well, the first thing that I would do is that I would offer advice to President Barroso on issues that may be concerning him, so he would request advice on key issues. And in addition to that, I will give him advice on things that he doesn't necessarily want to hear about in science, engineering and technology, and some other things if I can get away with it. So I think that that's important so that I'm both reactive and proactive. And this is important because for Europe, I firmly believe that science, engineering and technology, that is the key for us in Europe for our future success. And I just want to remind you all that the quality and the impact of the research that we do in Europe is second to none. We're terribly modest about our achievement, but we shouldn't be. What we do is outstanding. And I've said on a number of occasions, if I ask you or I go out to the street and I say, tell me the name of the best space agency in the world, then people will say to me, that must be NASA. It's ESA, it's the European Space Agency, by a whole number of measures. Who discovered potentially the Higgs boson, so the fundamental nature of matter? European leadership at CERN. Couldn't be done by any member state, and it couldn't be done by any other country in the world. It's a European collaboration, a real European flavour being led from here. The production of energy through nuclear fusion, European leadership. It's amazing what we can do when we collaborate. So my job is to try and increase the profile of science in everything that the Commission does. And not just the Commission, but also in member states. Because one of my other roles is also to look at relationships. So relationships between the Commission and agencies, and also the Commission and member states. Now, if I highlight just one issue to you that will, I suppose, illustrate what I'm talking about. If you look at the issue of genetically modified foods, you know that this is a hot topic right across Europe. And for me, it's really interesting looking at voting in Parliament because, and I'll give you the real example. If you look at member states voting, Austria votes 100% voting record against GMOs. Sweden, 100% voting record in favour of GMOs. The evidence is the same in Austria and Sweden. So there's a real challenge there to try and understand how we can take new technologies, evidence that's sometimes very challenging, and make that evidence accessible to people, easily interrogated by people, and frankly sometimes always understandable by people. And I would argue that, and I'm not being rude to men, but women often have better communication skills when it comes to translating information, and that's evidenced. if that's the case, then why don't women scientists get out more and communicate about what we do? Because unless we tell people about the massive advances that we're making in science, we can't translate that to an improved quality of life for citizens in Europe, which should be our aim. So there's the relationships, and I'm being very broad brush approach. The other thing for me is looking at the more communication-based challenges of science. Science is very technical, and it's become even more so in the past 10 or 20 years. So it's very difficult when you, for example, if I take myself, when I went to university, I could talk about science and literature and sculpture and music and poetry. And then I went to university and studied biochemistry. And after 4 years, I came out speaking biochemistry. And very few people could understand me except other biochemists. And it took me a long time to learn to speak English and other cultural languages after that. And it's something that we need to remind ourselves about, because if we can't speak to people about what we do, there's no point in doing it. Really, there isn't. So there's a massive challenge on communication, and also catapulting, for me, science, engineering and technology up the cultural agenda, because science, engineering and technology is one of the most creative things you can do with your life, and yet we don't see it as mainstream culture, which it is. So that, I think, is in a nutshell some of the areas that I'm looking at. Of course, it includes gender equality. And interestingly, and I was really interested in what Annalie said, one of the most, for me, fascinating things is that in my previous role as first Chief Scientific Advisor for Scotland, I had a minister who was very uninterested in gender issues. And I was a man minister. So I thought it was interesting. And I said to him that, he needed to pay attention to this. And he thought, not really. And the interesting thing about it was, I said to him, because he was involved in education and other areas, I said to him, okay, what I think we should do then is we should put a quota on women going to university, and we should not allow very many women to go to university. And immediately he got a bit nervous about this, and he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, do you not think it's incredibly stupid to allow women to go to university and then not to support them in the workforce, and not to make sure that once we've made them very valuable, we don't just throw them away? Do you not think retention is important? If it was a business, do you think people would lend you money on that basis? And he thought that it was so unacceptable, this whole idea, that he started to think maybe there's a point to thinking about gender equality. And if I just, the last thing I would leave you with, set aside the equality issue. It is truly madness to engage with people, to educate them so they're incredibly valuable, and then just somehow turn your back and lose them, because we will never succeed in Europe. And I truly believe this. If we don't engage with the female workforce, if we don't attract them and retain them, we will never be able to compete. And so it's up to us to make sure that happens, and I see that as part of my role as well. Thank you, Elizabeth.